The chrome-plated whistle glinted between Diane Hargrove's perfectly manicured fingers like a weapon of suburban warfare. She'd been waiting for this moment, the monthly Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association meeting where she would finally expose her nemesis, Margaret Whitmore, the most notorious rule-breaker in their meticulously maintained neighborhood. Margaret sat 3 rows ahead, her powder blue pantsuit pressed so sharply it could slice through concrete, her posture betraying nothing. But Diane knew. She always knew. The community center's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a clinical glare across rows of folding chairs filled with homeowners who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Yet here they were, trapped in the monthly ritual of neighborhood governance, where every shade of beige paint, every blade of grass, and every mailbox alignment became a potential battlefield. The chair recognizes Margaret Whitmore, droned Harold Jenkins, the HOA president, his voice as dry as the neighborhood covenant documentation. "You have a complaint regarding the recent landscaping ordinance." Margaret rose, her movement calculated and precise. "I'd like to discuss the inconsistent application of our community guidelines, specifically regarding vehicle parking and temporary structures." Diane's grip tightened on her whistle. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for weeks. Her meticulously compiled dossier of Margaret's infractions was tucked inside a manila folder, each page a testament to her neighbor's brazen disregard for their sacred community rules. What Margaret didn't know was that Diane had spent the last 3 months documenting every single violation. Unauthorized garden gnomes, photographed. Trash cans left out 27 minutes past the prescribed removal time. Timed and logged. An inflatable Halloween decoration that exceeded the permitted height by precisely 4.5 inches, measured and reported. This wasn't just about rules. This was about maintaining the pristine reputation of Oak Ridge Estates, a neighborhood so exclusive that getting approved required more paperwork than adopting a child. Diane had dedicated her entire retirement to preserving their community's standards, and she could not let anyone compromise those standards. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with Margaret's razor-sharp pantsuit crease. Homeowners shifted uncomfortably, sensing the impending confrontation. Some looked eager, others terrified, but everyone was watching. "Ms. Whitmore," Diane interrupted, her voice cutting through the silence like a razor, "I believe I have some evidence that might interest the board regarding your recent activities." Margaret's perfectly maintained composure flickered, just for a microsecond. But in the world of age-old politics, a microsecond was an eternity. And Diane Hargrove was about to make that microsecond count. The whistle around her neck seemed to pulse with anticipation, a silent weapon, ready to be deployed in the most civilized of wars. The monthly Homeowners Association meeting. The aftermath of the HOA meeting was anything but quiet. Diane's allegations had sent ripples through Oak Ridge Estates faster than a golf cart could traverse their immaculate cul-de-sac. Margaret Whitmore might have maintained her composure during the meeting, but the gloves were now decidedly off. 3 days later, Diane discovered her meticulously landscaped front yard had become ground zero for neighborhood warfare. Her prized rose bushes, carefully cultivated hybrid teas that had won 3 consecutive community gardening competitions, were now sporting mysterious brown spots. Not enough to kill them, but just enough to mar their perfect symmetry. She knew exactly who was responsible. Margaret's tactics were subtle, almost surgical. The brown spots looked like a natural occurrence, something that could have happened by accident. But Diane Hargrove didn't believe in accidents. Not in Oak Ridge Estates. Not when rules were at stake. Her first move was to call the HOA emergency hotline. Harold Jenkins, the HOA president, picked up on the 3rd ring. "I'm reporting a potential landscaping violation," Diane declared, her voice a razor-sharp instrument of precision. Harold sighed. He'd been expecting this call. Diane and Margaret had been locked in a cold war for months, and he was caught in the crossfire. "Ms. Hargrove will need photographic evidence." You know the protocol. Protocol. The magic word in Oak Ridge Estates. Everything had a protocol, from mailbox placement to the exact shade of white permitted for exterior house paint. Diane was a master of protocol, and she had documentation ready within the hour. What Margaret didn't anticipate was Diane's next move. Instead of simply filing a complaint, she commissioned a professional plant pathologist to examine her rose bushes. Dr. Emily Rodriguez arrived with a portable microscope and an array of scientific equipment that looked more suited to a hospital laboratory than a suburban front yard. "Interesting," Dr. Rodriguez muttered, carefully collecting samples. "These marks aren't typical plant disease. There's something deliberate about them." Deliberate. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Meanwhile, Margaret continued her daily routine as if nothing had happened. Her midnight blue Mercedes GLK carefully navigated the neighborhood streets, always precisely 2.3 miles per hour under the speed limit. She participated in the community garden club, attended neighborhood watch meetings, and maintained an exterior of absolute perfection. But Diane was watching, always watching. The neighborhood began taking sides. The Hendersons from number 742 were clearly Team Margaret. Their lawn was always immaculate, their recycling bins never out a minute longer than permitted. The Garcias at 738 seemed to lean towards Diane, always quick with a knowing smile and a nod whenever she passed. Oak Ridge Estates was a powder keg, and everyone knew it. The next move would determine everything. And Diane Hargrove was not about to let anyone, especially not Margaret Whitmore, get the upper hand. Digital warfare erupted on the Oak Ridge Estates neighborhood Facebook group. What started as a seemingly innocuous post about community standards quickly devolved into a battlefield of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled accusations. Some people, Margaret wrote in a post timestamped at precisely 6:47 a.m., seemed to have forgotten the importance of mutual respect and proper lawn maintenance. The post garnered 17 likes within minutes, most from retirees who considered lawn care a competitive sport. Diane's response was surgical. She uploaded a 17-page PDF documenting potential violations across the neighborhood, complete with color-coded annotations and GPS-verified location markers. It was less a response and more a declaration of total war. The neighborhood watched, simultaneously horrified and fascinated. Dr. Emily Rodriguez's plant pathology report arrived via certified mail, a document so official it required a signature and seemed more suited to a federal investigation than a suburban dispute. The findings were cryptic, traces of an uncommon fungal agent that couldn't have occurred naturally. Sabotage was suggested, but not definitively proven. Diane's next move was classic HOA Karen strategy. She requested an emergency special meeting of the Oak Ridge Estates Architectural Review Committee. The meeting would be held in the community center's smallest conference room, a space so beige it seemed to suck the color from anyone who entered. Margaret knew the invitation was coming. She had her own folder prepared, meticulously organized with counter-evidence that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. Each page was laminated, each photograph protected in a crystal-clear sleeve. The neighborhood was splitting into factions. The Hendersons, longtime Margaret supporters, started leaving their recycling bins out an extra 3 minutes, a microscopic act of rebellion. The Garcias began taking extra-long walks, strategically passing both Diane and Margaret's houses, collecting intelligence like suburban spies. Harold Jenkins, the HOA president, was losing sleep. He'd gotten 3 separate email threads, 2 phone calls, and a hand-delivered complaint folder before 9 a.m. The neighborhood was a powder keg, and he was the reluctant match. What neither Diane nor Margaret realized was that their war was about to escalate in a way neither of them could predict. The first hint came on a Tuesday morning. A moving truck appeared on Sycamore Lane, an unexpected arrival that would change everything. New neighbors meant new variables, new potential allies or enemies in the ongoing battle for Oak Ridge Estates' supremacy. As the truck's hydraulic lift lowered a sleek, gunmetal gray vehicle that looked more like a mobile command center than a simple SUV, Diane adjusted her reading glasses and leaned closer to her front window. Something was coming, and in Oak Ridge Estates, nothing remained hidden for long. The new neighbors arrived like a military operation. Jack and Alina Rodriguez, no relation to the plant pathologist who'd examined Diane's roses, moved in with a precision that would make a Swiss watch look sloppy. Their gunmetal gray SUV backed into the driveway at exactly 10:23 a.m., positioning itself with mathematical accuracy that made even Harold Jenkins nod in quiet approval. Within hours, their lawn was a masterpiece of suburban perfection. Not a single blade of grass dared to grow out of line. The landscaping looked less like a yard and more like a living, breathing architectural rendering. Diane watched from behind her meticulously cleaned living room curtains. Something about the Rodriguez family felt different. They weren't just another set of new neighbors. They were something more. Alina Rodriguez worked in corporate compliance. Jack was a former military logistics specialist now consulting for tech firms. Their LinkedIn profiles were so polished they could have been used as mirrors. But it was their teenage daughter, Sophia, who truly caught Diane's attention. Sophia Rodriguez was different. While other teenagers might spend their time on social media or video games, she appeared to be cataloging the entire neighborhood's compliance or lack thereof with a professional-grade camera and what looked suspiciously like a municipal code handbook. The first interaction came unexpectedly. Margaret Whitmore's infamous midnight blue Mercedes somehow managed to park 3 inches over her own property line, a violation so minor it would have gone unnoticed by anyone except the most dedicated rule enforcer. Sophia Rodriguez was exactly that type of enforcer. A formal complaint arrived at the HOA office before sunrise, typed double-spaced with footnotes. The document was so meticulously prepared it made Diane's own complaint folders look like rough drafts. Harold Jenkins stared at the complaint, his coffee going cold. This was a level of precision he'd never encountered before. Meanwhile, the neighborhood watched. The Hendersons whispered. The Garcias took strategic walks. Diane sharpened her metaphorical pencils, And Margaret, she remained impossibly calm, her pantsuit pressed to razor-sharp perfection. The neighborhood's delicate ecosystem of rules, passive-aggressive interactions, and carefully maintained facades was about to be disrupted in ways no one could predict. Jack Rodriguez appeared at the community center that evening, requesting to review the past 5 years of HOA meeting minutes. His manner was polite, his request seemingly innocuous. But something in his steady gaze suggested he wasn't just another new resident looking to integrate. He was hunting for something. As footlight fell over Oak Ridge Estates, as streetlights flickered to life with programmed precision, another day of suburban warfare had passed. But everyone, from Diane to Margaret to the mysterious Rodriguez family, knew this was just the beginning. The HOA emergency meeting was called with less than 48 hours' notice, a tactical move that immediately set everyone on edge. Jack Rodriguez had discovered something in those meticulously preserved meeting minutes, something that made Harold Jenkins visibly sweat despite the community center's industrial-strength air conditioning. Diane arrived 45 minutes early, her leather portfolio containing no fewer than 3 backup copies of every document she might need. Margaret wore a power suit the color of storm clouds, her posture a weapon of its own. The Rodriguez family sat near the back, Sophia taking detailed notes on a tablet that looked more like a classified government device than consumer electronics. Item 1, Harold began, his voice crackling with nervous energy, a potential discrepancy in our community bylaws dating back to 2007. The room was so quiet you could hear a perfectly manicured lawn being judged. Jack Rodriguez stood, his military bearing evident in every calculated movement. There's an inconsistency in the original zoning documents that could invalidate several of our current community restrictions. Diane's hand shot up. Objection. Margaret's eyebrow arched, the closest she'd come to an emotional response in years. The inconsistency, as Jack methodically explained, centered on a zoning easement that had been improperly documented. It was the kind of technical detail that would make most people's eyes glaze over. But in Oak Ridge Estates, this was more explosive than a fireworks display on the 4th of July. Sophia Rodriguez projected a series of documents onto the community center's pull-down screen. Maps, legal text, and property lines danced across the surface with surgical precision. Each slide was a potential nuclear auction in the neighborhood's delicate ecosystem of rules and regulations. If these documents are correct, Jack continued, several of our most cherished community guidelines may be, technically, unenforceable. The implications were seismic: mailbox regulations, lawn height restrictions, fence color guidelines. The very fabric of Oak Ridge Estates hung in the balance. Margaret's perfectly maintained composure flickered. For just a moment, a look of genuine concern crossed her face. Diane's fingers drummed against her portfolio. This was war, and the battlefield had just shifted dramatically. The Hendersons exchanged worried glances. The Garcias leaned forward, hanging on every word. New alliances were forming, old rivalries suddenly seemed trivial. Harold Jenkins looked like a man who had suddenly realized he was standing in the eye of a hurricane. Furthermore, Sophia Rodriguez added, her teenage voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel, we've identified potential retroactive financial implications that could affect every homeowner present. The room collectively held its breath. Outside, a sprinkler system clicked on with mechanical precision, the only sound breaking the absolute silence of a neighborhood about to have its entire world turned upside down. The fallout from the emergency meeting spread through Oak Ridge Estates like a digital wildfire. Within hours, the neighborhood's carefully curated Facebook group became a battleground of legal speculation, passive-aggressive comments, and barely contained panic. Diane Hargrove realized she needed to take control of the narrative. Her first move was a masterpiece of HOA Karen's strategy. A meticulously crafted email sent to every single homeowner, complete with a 14-page attachment documenting her perspective on the zoning discrepancy. Margaret Whitmore, not to be outdone, responded with her own communication. The legal-sized envelope hand-delivered to each residence, sealed with a gold foil sticker that looked like it had been designed by a corporate law firm. The Rodriguez family, meanwhile, remained tantalizingly quiet. Jack Rodriguez's background in logistics became painfully evident. He seemed to be 3 moves ahead of everyone else, carefully orchestrating a community-wide investigation that felt more like a military operation than a neighborhood dispute. Sophia Rodriguez continued her systematic documentation. Security cameras mysteriously appeared on their property, state-of-the-art devices that could probably read a license plate from 3 blocks away. The neighborhood watched, simultaneously terrified and fascinated. The first cracks appeared in the Oak Ridge Estates facade. The Hendersons, longtime Margaret supporters, suddenly began questioning every rule they'd previously accepted without challenge. The Garcias started hosting impromptu neighborhood meetings in their immaculately maintained backyard. Harold Jenkins, the HOA president, found himself cornered at the local Starbucks. Neighbors who had previously treated him with distant respect now demanded answers, their voices rising above the sound of espresso machines. If these zoning documents are correct, one neighbor pressed, does that mean we've been paying incorrect fees for years? The financial implications were staggering. Retrospective refunds, potential legal challenges. The entire economic structure of the neighborhood teetered on the edge of collapse. Diane Hargrove's world was unraveling. The very system of rules she had dedicated her retirement to protecting was now under threat. Her carefully maintained spreadsheets, her years of documentation, her entire identity as the neighborhood's most dedicated rule enforcer, all of it hung in the balance. Margaret Whitmore, typically unflappable, made a rare mistake. A single typo in her carefully crafted legal document, a microscopic error that would have gone unnoticed by anyone except the most dedicated rule enforcer. And Sofia Rodriguez was definitely that type of enforcer. As the sun set on Oak Ridge Estates, the neighborhood held its collective breath. Something was coming, something that would change everything they thought they knew about their perfectly manicured little world. The Rodriguez family's SUV sat in their driveway, a silent sentinel watching over a neighborhood about to explode. Alina Rodriguez appeared at the county recorder's office at precisely 8:01 a.m., a folder tucked under her arm that contained enough documentation to make even the most seasoned bureaucrat weep. What she discovered would blow the entire neighborhood wide open. The zoning discrepancy was real, but it was only the tip of an iceberg that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Diane Hargrove received the first call at 10:23 a.m. Her landline, meticulously maintained and kept for official communications, rang with an urgency that sent a chill down her spine. On the other end, Harold Jenkins sounded like a man who had seen a ghost. "We've got a problem," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Margaret Whitmore was already in motion. Her midnight blue Mercedes cut through the neighborhood's streets with surgical precision, stopping at strategic locations. She was collecting information, building her defense or her attack. The Rodriguez family's investigation had uncovered something far more significant than a simple zoning error. It was a systemic irregularity that traced back to the very founding of Oak Ridge Estates. Financial discrepancies, misappropriated funds, decades of carefully hidden paperwork that suggested the HOA's entire legal foundation was built on quicksand. Sofia Rodriguez sat in the family's command center, their immaculately organized home office, cross-referencing documents with a precision that would make forensic accountants look sloppy. Her teenage fingers danced across multiple screens, each one displaying a different layer of the neighborhood's hidden history. "Dad," she called out, her voice a mix of excitement and professional detachment, "I've found something." Jack Rodriguez leaned in. What Sofia had discovered was not just a smoking gun. It was an entire arsenal. The neighborhood began to fragment. Alliances that had stood for decades crumbled. The Hendersons, longtime Margaret supporters, suddenly found themselves questioning everything they'd ever believed about their perfect community. The Garcias started hosting emergency neighborhood meetings in their backyard, their carefully manicured lawn becoming ground zero for a community uprising. Diane Hargrove realized her entire life's work, her dedication to rules, to order, to the sanctity of HOA regulations, was about to come crashing down. Everything she had built, everything she had fought for, hung by the thinnest of threads. Margaret Whitmore, for the first time, looked vulnerable. Her perfectly pressed pantsuit seemed to lose its crisp edges. Her meticulously maintained composure began to crack. Harold Jenkins knew his days as HOA president were numbered. The phone calls, the emails, a mounting pressure, it was all too much. As the sun began to set on Oak Ridge Estates, casting long shadows across perfectly trimmed lawns, something fundamental was changing. The neighbor of its carefully constructed facade was about to come tumbling down, and the Rodriguez family was holding the sledgehammer. The final showdown happened not with a bang, but with a meticulously organized community meeting that felt more like a judicial proceeding. Oak Ridge Estates Community Center had never seen anything like it. Every homeowner was present, packed into the beige room like perfectly organized file folders. The Rodriguez family sat at the front, their presence both clinical and electric. Jack Rodriguez had brought enough documentation to wallpaper the entire building, while Sofia managed a complex digital presentation that looked like it belonged in a congressional hearing. Diane Hargrove and Margaret Whitmore sat on opposite sides of the room, their long-standing rivalry momentarily overshadowed by the magnitude of what was about to be revealed. Alina Rodriguez stood first, her corporate compliance background shining through every carefully chosen word. "We've discovered systemic financial irregularities dating back to the neighborhood's incorporation in 1986. The numbers were staggering: misappropriated funds, questionable assessments, years of financial manipulation that had gone unnoticed by even the most dedicated rule enforcers." Harold Jenkins looked like a man waiting for his sentencing. His decades as HOA president were about to come to a spectacular end. Diane Hargrove's world was crumbling. The very system of rules she had dedicated her life to enforcing was revealed to be built on a foundation of sand. Her meticulously maintained spreadsheets, her years of documentation, her entire identity as the neighborhood's most dedicated rule enforcer, all of it was now meaningless. Margaret Whitmore, typically unflappable, showed the first genuine emotion anyone had ever seen from her. A single tear, quickly and professionally wiped away. The Rodriguez family wasn't interested in destruction. They were interested in rebuilding. Sophia's presentation outlined a path forward. A complete restructuring of the HOA with full transparency, fair assessments, and a complete audit of past financial records. As the meeting progressed, the neighborhood's dynamics shifted. The Hendersons and the Garcias, once divided, found common ground. Neighbors who had spent years in passive-aggressive conflict now spoke to each other with a newfound respect. Diane Hargrove made a decision that would define her legacy. Instead of fighting, she volunteered to be part of the new oversight committee. Her dedication to rules would finally serve a greater purpose. Margaret Whitmore, in an equally surprising move, offered her legal expertise to help with the restructuring. The sun was setting on Oak Ridge Estates, casting long shadows across perfectly manicured lawns. But for the first time in decades, those lawns represented something more than just a battlefield of suburban regulations. They represented a community reborn. The Rodriguez family's gunmetal gray SUV sat in their driveway, no longer just a vehicle, but a symbol of the change that had swept through the neighborhood. Oak Ridge Estates would never be the same again.